Welcome to Is It Worth Seeing? A Teen Radio UK production. So, here we go then. I haven't been in front of a microphone for a little bit, so bear with. But I'm getting back into doing the radio thing and the podcast thing, and I think this is a pretty good place to start. So, it's a new month, it's a new podcast which is going to be out every Friday, and before I tell you about this podcast, bear with, I'm going to introduce myself. I am Toby Mesme. Hi, nice to meet you. If you've never heard my voice before, I am 15 years old, and I do stuff, and I say things. There's not really much more to it than that, you know? I'm not Greta Thunberg, I'm not saving the planet, I'm not an astronaut, I'm not an accountant, I'm someone who sits in a room, in front of a microphone, in a soundproof room, and I say things on various platforms. And this is my new podcast, as I say, out every Friday. It's called Is It Worth Seeing? And it's going to be here on this YouTube channel. So obviously, subscribe, notifications, all that good stuff. So simply, so it gets to you, basically. So you don't have to remember it's Friday. Then search for it. Go like, yes, it's Friday. Let me just Google it. You can just get it delivered to your sub box. Why not? This podcast focuses on something I've always had an interest in, but something I haven't really explored, especially not done a podcast on it. And it's 2019. If you have a specialist interest, even if it's quite broad, it doesn't have to be a really niche interest, but whatever your interest is, you're doing a podcast about it in 2019. Like everyone and their dog has a podcast. So this is a bit of a curveball. What's Toby doing his podcast about? You see, if you know me, you'd probably think I'm going to go, it's a podcast about the internal workings of the radio industry, or like, yes, politics in the modern day. Just something like that. It's not. It's something we can all enjoy, I think, which is why I thought I might as well do it. This is something that I'm interested in, that most people are sort of interested in, and we can all be sort of interested in it together. It's about cinema, films. It's not about behind-the-scenes geeky film camera stuff, which I know nothing about. It's simply about me as a viewer, and you as a viewer, and me seeing films at the cinema so that you don't have to, and then, in a completely spoiler-free way, telling you whether or not it's worth going to see said film. You do not have to waste your hard-earned money. I can tell you if the film is good or crap. That's the premise for this. Alright, so I've seen 3 films this week, and going to give them a rating out of 5, and as well, just sort of tell you about it, give you a little bit of background, tell you my thoughts, and no spoilers whatsoever, nothing will be ruined, and then you can make the decision based on what I've said as to whether it's worth going and seeing the film and parting with your money. So I've been to the cinema a lot, I know, poor me, what a horrid job. Going to the cinema, getting some snacks, reclining, watching a film. I'm not gonna lie, it's quite nice homework to have to do, but I'm gonna talk to you about the 3 films now. Let's start with this one. Yes, Countdown. Now, this was an interesting one. You might have seen some trailers for this, you might not. It was pretty low profile, and on top of that, the cast, mostly pretty low profile from where I sit. As someone who knows nothing about cinema, it kind of went over my head a bit. The trailer for this looked really good. It looked suspenseful, it looked scary. But you know, trailers mislead here, because some great films have awful trailers. Some awful films have amazing trailers. So the basic premise for Countdown is, it's sort of something that's been done many times. It's quite a textbook horror film, if we can call it that. And it's basically, there's a phone, someone gets an app, and the app counts down, and creepy stuff pops out, and when it hits 0, you die. And there's all this supernatural stuff flying around, and it's, ooh, scary, oh look, jump scare. It's just classic fodder for a horror film, but because it's phones and social media and stuff, it's sort of trying to do a modern take on it. It's basically that. I've seen this sort of idea done many times, like this, it's on someone's neck in Doctor Who and it's counting down and it's all that sort of stuff. It's just a nice, scary idea. When I saw this trailer, I was like, I bet this will scare me, because it's a sort of idea that would creep me out at least. and I was hoping that this would really deliver for what it is. But when I went to go and see it, realistically, it didn't deliver. It under-delivered. I'm sorry. Now, obviously, it could have been way, way worse. It holds together as a movie. It's not completely fluctuated and all over the place. It's got a narrative, and it sticks to it. I'll give it that. The acting, mostly, was mediocre. It was not awful. It didn't make me, completely cringe to death. But in most films, you'll see better, unless they're really bad films. It has engaging moments as well. There are bits where you feel invested. You really do, and you're on the edge of your seat, this is going to happen. But very few and far between, compared to just about most films. But, we've got to give it credit for sort of investing you by the end. And to this film's great credit, it's short. So if it was a 2-hour feature film, I'd probably be having a rant at how awful it was. But because it's only about 90 minutes, you're sort of not wasting your life on it. So, what else can I pick out from this? I'm trying to work out a way to explain this to you without sounding really pedantic. Basically, there were a lot of really obvious plot holes that really ruined it for me. And I know that sounds really pedantic and really, it's these plot holes. But no, I've seen Marvel films, I've seen all sorts of rubbish films as well. Not that Marvel films are rubbish, but they're not cinematic masterpieces in terms of plot holes, is all I mean. But I've seen some really bad made films with really terrible plots. And I haven't picked apart plot holes because I try not to look at it like that. It's a film, it's escapism, just enjoy it. But with this, it wasn't how people actually act. The decisions people take and everything, it just seemed so textbook, and so you could almost predict where it was going. It's probably what you'd expect from this kind of thing. It just seemed like banging out another horror film. But from where I sat, it was barely even creepy. There were some elements that were well made, and some bits of acting were well done. There's always exceptions. Some stuff looked good, but generally, it was mostly unrealistic, to the point of parody and plastic, very surface deep. Nothing was fleshed out enough. It followed a formula. It stuck to it. It had its moments where it was a little bit creepy. And it had its moments where you jumped a little bit but obviously this film, its stock in trade should be going, scared. It's not scary. And, I can't fault it. It tried to be funny. It was barely funny. There was the odd moment. But it was just a bit cringy and it didn't work fully. I'm giving it 2 stars. I was disappointed with this. I thought it might deliver. At least a bit of fear. But no, nothing. And from that we move on to, because it's Halloween week, The Addams Family. That's right, all the creepy stuff is on. Except this is, it's a kids' animated movie, and it's based on an old series about this creepy family that was done, I think it was in the 60s. It was a long time ago. I went into this, obviously, with no prior knowledge of that, because I wasn't really consuming television content in the 1960s. I went there, there were a few cringe moments, obviously, but that's just sort of let that off the hook in an animated film. It was very well made. It was very creative in its ridiculousness. Overall, it was pretty funny, actually. I laughed at a few points. There were sort of chuckle moments. There were some interesting themes and messages in terms of how it sort of portrayed itself, and it did get a little righteous and preachy every now and again, but I think it was conveying some interesting messages in a way that I haven't seen animated films do before. It wasn't like the classic messages. It was sort of, maybe it was some of the classic messages, but sort of conveyed in a new and an interesting way. For what it is, it's very good. The characters were engaging and endearing, and kids will enjoy it. So I'm giving it 4 stars. For what it is, it's a 4 stars. Just as Countdown, for what it is 2 stars. Now, the big event, Doctor Sleep. Basically a follow-up to The Shining, the legendary horror film. All going back to Stephen King, this as well. this was the big one, right? Came out on Halloween night. I went to see it on Halloween night. And this was definitely a good way to spend my Halloween night, I'd say, because it was creepy and it was scary. And, you know, that's sort of what you're going for. Now, I went into this thinking, right, the reviews don't look great. I bet this is going to be a letdown. Because, honestly, you've got to give credit, especially to Countdown for this. Horror films and actually being scary are so incredibly difficult. When you really think about it, it's bloody difficult. You know? But this film stuck with me. I'm only just sort of getting over it. And it was genuinely terrifying at points. Now, obviously, some of that is that it pushed a particular button for me. And sort of a trigger for me. I was like, oh, this scares me. But it did good stuff, right? It was almost perfect. It was a little too slow. It's very long, this. You're in for the long haul. But fear makes time go faster in a film. And sometimes there are, you know, unconvincing moments. So knock off a few points for that. Because some of it, you're like, ugh, well, you know, this is a little sort of, oh, it's a bit meta, it's a bit unrealistic, it's a bit, your head's spinning a bit towards the end. Your eyes are like unfocusing from it. There's so much stuff going on, stuff tipping upside down. There was an overall feeling of dread. You feel quite trapped watching it, which is sort of what it's trying to convey. It's a horror film. There weren't too many like jump scares, which is good because that's cheap horror. But it was a great horror film. So I would recommend, if you want to see something quite light and funny with kids, maybe younger kids, The Addams Family. If you want to go and see a good horror film, go see Dr. Sleep. If you want to, well, just don't go and see Countdown, basically. Dreadful. But there you go. That's it. That was our first podcast. That was the very first episode of Is It Worth Seeing? See, in under 15 minutes, got through the major highlights of the box office in the UK this week. I hope you enjoyed the first podcast. I've been Toby Mesme. Remember, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can get me on Instagram at Toby_Mesme. Drop me an email, tobylepatymesme@gmail.com. And there's all my contact stuff on Instagram as well. You can DM me. You can, I guess, probably. There's all that sort of stuff. Yeah, I've enjoyed this. And it's not taken long, and we might have helped you a little bit. If you've seen any of these films, or you're going to, let me know in the comments section of this, or on the email, what did you think? What were your thoughts? Because, you know, it's a tricky one, isn't it? We all have different opinions on films. So, if you saw something I said was awful, you thought it was great, tell me. If I said something was great and you thought it was awful, tell me. So I'd be really interested to see if I'm sort of, how am I doing with this? Let me know if my review was helpful. This has been episode 1 on Friday the 1st of November of Is It Worth Seeing? It's your episode for this week, reviewing the films, and next week, next Friday, there'll be another episode. Thank you very much for listening. This has been a Teen Radio UK production. I've been Toby Mesme, and I'll see you soon.